let's go ahead and get started. I'll have Shannon, kind of mute the lines as we go forward. This is your first time joining us. Welcome. I'm Rochelle Wilhite. I'm the designated broker and owner of Best Choice Realty. Tonight, we're going to talk about the additional clauses that we've provided to all of you that work at Best Choice Realty. Hopefully, some of the things we talk about tonight will give you guys an edge on some of the competition, but it's very tough right now. So I'm going to share kind of a story of what I typically hear from agents lately, and we'll talk about how these additional clauses may help a broker, a buyer's agent specifically, win. There's not some golden, I think, reason on why one broker wins over another broker. Sometimes it just comes down to the terms of the agreement or the price of the home or the property. So again, we can talk about a lot of these things offline, or if you have specifics that you have questions about, or utilizing the form in general, that's certainly what we're here to do at Best Choice Realty. So Jerry Kay, myself, Nick, Shannon, Candace, all of us are using or will be using the additional clauses as a way to keep the deal on track and make sure legally that we're protected. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. For those of you that just joined, if you have comments or you'd like to chat, we do use the chat quite a bit. So as I talk, if there are questions or you need additional clarity, be sure just to click, type in the chat, and then Shannon at the end will be able to read some of the questions, or some of your fellow colleagues, Best Choice Realty agents that are on the call as well, might be able to answer your question quickly. So let's get started. As we look at this first slide, you see a battle of hands. It's like, who's going to win, the buyer, the seller? And so with today's market being a seller's market, oftentimes the seller tries to win, but there also is some need for protection. So even if the seller does win and gets the purchase price and gets the terms that they want, we want to make sure that it's as balanced as we possibly can so that we don't harm our buyers. We don't have lawsuits or legal proceedings that happen, 6 months after they purchase, we have an issue. Luckily for us at Best Choice Realty, you guys do a great job of getting up to speed with education and training, and we don't have any current pending complaints against Best Choice Realty or any seller or agent for that matter. But it's always good to be proactive and know what you're dealing with. So tonight we'll go over some ideas and strategies to help you. Let's go to the next slide, Shan. So I get this question, I told Shan, I'm getting it daily. So, you go on the MLS and you are looking for a property for your buyer, and you see an offer review date or something that says review upon receipt. And you get pretty frustrated if you're a buyer's agent, especially if you've had conversations with that listing agent saying, are you going to honor the review date? And they say, oh yeah, we're going to definitely wait until February 23rd, when in fact, they end up accepting an offer today, which is the 22nd. And then your client gets a notification from Redfin or from Zillow or from whatever online portal they're using. And it almost is just a dagger in the heart, because you are the one that should be delivering that information. And so they become very frustrated about the process. So one way to kind of head this off, especially if you're talking with your buyers and doing a good buyer consultation, before you even set foot out of going and showing them properties, you want to kind of tell them that on the websites or on the portal or on the MLS, when you see an offer review date of such a date, that doesn't mean that the seller cannot accept our offer sooner. In fact, many of them are doing just that. They're trying to utilize that offer review date to spark interest and collect offers. But oftentimes they'll just say, you know what, we got a cash offer, or we got an offer that they were waiving inspection and waiving finance. And that's good enough for the seller. And whether or not that's your decision, that needs to be the seller's decision on whether they wait out the review date or if they accept an offer sooner. But a lot of buyer's agents, I get one every day. I'm not picking on anybody today, but this one just came in tonight. Every day I get somebody that says, Rochelle, is there a violation? Can you find the other agent? Can you deal with the listing agent? And the answer is no. That is perfectly okay for them to accept an offer earlier than the review date. So, you got to be a good negotiator. You need to understand the seller's positions. Is the house vacant? Is it lived in? What is important to the seller? Have good dialogue. Even if you do all of those things like this particular agent did, you still find out as of just a little bit ago, it now says pending. And they just spoke with the agent yesterday. So again, it's just a date, and that date could be a moving target. And many clients are beating out the review dates by waiving or providing additional clauses or having some additional things that they sweeten up their offer to get that seller to not wait until the review date. We had this happen in 2017. This is not a new thing. It's just every county we're experiencing now is experiencing what we experienced in King County back in 2017. So the only reason that many of these buyers wait is because there was a conversation or there was a verbal. But as you guys know from your real estate classes, just because you have a verbal does not mean it's legal. So you do need to, if you want to put your client's foot forward and you want to write a good, clean offer and put everything together, sometimes that's the best offer and they go for it. So I know it's frustrating out there, but do the best you can to ask all the questions, build a relationship, and then if your client chooses, go ahead and submit the offer, especially if it's very compelling. So let's go to the next slide. So the MLS is, just so you guys have a heads up, if some of you get a ton of emails like I do, you sometimes gloss over sometimes the important things, but the MLS forms are all changing. March 3rd, you'll have a whole new set of forms that you have to be aware of. So those of you that are new to the business or just joining us at Best Choice, we are going to synthesize the information and get it to you in a relevant format. But you might want to go ahead and take and register for a class with the attorney that's the legal counsel for the MLS. Shannon and I both took the class. I believe Nick did as well this morning. And it was really well done. It went through every section or every form that was changed and gave us an opportunity to see why those changes were made and how we adapt to those changes. So if you haven't made arrangements, I believe there are still some openings for March 1st, March 3rd, and March 5th. If you want to go ahead and book that, you can also get 3 clock hours offered for that. And I think it's well worth your time. I sat through the entire 3 hours, took a ton of notes, and I'm prepared to help you in synthesize that data and put it into practice, which I think is the most important part of these clock hour classes or these forms updates. You can get the high level, you can read it, you can listen to it, but sometimes it's actually putting it into practice. And so we will be doing a class on that coming up in March. It will be more like mid-March or end of March, where we will divide the Best Choice Realty brokers into groups. So be on the lookout for your email box for your calendar time. And based on if you're a new broker or you're an existing broker or somebody that's been in the business 20, 30 years, we're going to break it up into groups so that you're not sitting on a webinar or on a Zoom meeting with, say, a new broker and you've been in the business for 20 years and you just want to get the kind of the Cliff Notes version. We're breaking it up into groups so that you can interact or learn with other groups of agents at Best Choice that have a similar tenure or similar experience with the forms. There were significant changes on the forms. There's significant changes to the 35E, which is the escalation. There's significant changes to the finance and the inspection addenda. So you will need to take a class. And if you don't take the class from the MLS, just look for the date and time. We'll label them. The groups will be labeled based on tenure and experience. So we'll have a raindrop group, we'll have a thunderstorm group. You know, just like if you were taking swimming lessons as a kid, you might, you'll fall into one of those groups. And so look for a calendar invite for March on that time. Other things that you might want to consider in the next week is we are doing a workshop with the lender on Wednesday at noon to 1. So Movement Mortgage will be in attendance and they'll talk about bridge loans and other financial things that you might want to consider. If you're using Movement, great. If you're not, you'll have some good things you can ask your preferred lender so that you make sure you're covering all your bases with your buyers. So if you can attend 12 to 1 on Wednesday, I think that will be a really helpful event. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So jumping on in, a lot of people say, well, Rochelle, you've got this legally approved addendum for Best Choice Realty agents. Where do you place that? How do you incorporate, say, an additional clause into the Form 21 or the Form 28 or the Form, all of the typical purchase and sale agreements? And the answer is you place it simply on Section 16, Term 16, which is BCR Additional Clauses. So you'll want to go ahead and indicate that if you are going to use the Best Choice Realty addendum, you're going to want to indicate that on Term 16. You'll have to type it in. It's not one of the drop-down options that you're going to have. If you're a new broker, you're kind of confused. You're like, how do I type that into the addenda? If you want to attend our contract negotiation class, I'm sure Nick will go over how to add an addenda or how to type something in if you need some additional help with that. But that's where you would place it in addition to the 22A, the 22D, the 35, all the various addenda that you're going to need. So make sure that you know where to place that. If you end up putting it, say, in your package, and you didn't put it in the Form 16, in essence, the law says that if it's part of the package and it's mutually accepted, meaning the buyer and the seller sign the BCR additional clauses, and perhaps maybe you forgot to put it on Term 16, as long as both parties agree to that additional clauses, it becomes part of the contract. It does override potentially clauses that are in the purchase and sale agreement. So you do want to make sure that you explain why we're using the Best Choice Realty additional clause, and it really kind of summarizes that on the first page. So let's go to the next slide, Shannon. So you have an entire addendum. It's actually 2 pages that has been created. I've mailed it to you guys so you can actually physically see it and read it. And our attorney has provided a letter with some additional review of Best Choice Realty. I just popped it in the mail, so check your mailboxes if you want to have some additional help. And a letter from the attorney explaining how she reviewed Best Choice Realty. But she created this, amended some of the things from a prior year. We used this back in 2017, and we just changed it up based on the new contracts. So really it's meant to be an additional clause that you could check box, but there isn't a buyer acknowledgement section at the very top that talks about, in a typical real estate transaction, a buyer will usually provide several contingencies. Again, this is just the buyer's acknowledgement so that we have properly legally advised them of the reason why we're using this additional clauses. So they acknowledge that there are certain clauses that protect them, and they understand that we can't provide them legal advice, and that they should actually, if they're concerned, they can have their attorney review this additional clause. But it's pretty comprehensive as to what we can include here on this additional clause. So you put the date on the top. You'll have to drag and drop that information over, especially if you're using Authentisign and Transaction Desk. This will be available on Transaction Desk for you to use. But since it's a document, not a form in the MLS, you will need to drag and drop the buyer and the seller's names and the address and the date into the top section if you are going to use this. Let's go to the next slide. So number 1, so I'm just going to go through term by term so you guys know why we included this. But many of the times we included this was because we're seeing way too much creativity when it comes to utilizing that optional clauses on 22D other. We were seeing way too much creativity, and we need to clean that up so that we have a vetted form. One of the things that happened is Jerry Kay had provided like a hold harmless language in regards to a septic, and John L. Scott discarded it and said we are not practicing law because we basically took the same language and put it on a Form 34. So what we're seeing from our competitors is that they'd rather have an approved Best Choice Realty addendum than they would like us to just copy this language and put it on a Form 34. Even though the language is vetted, they wanted to see something more legitimate. And so that's the reason we decided to go ahead and contact the attorney and have them go through it line item by line item to make sure that we were in compliance with the law, and that we also had the ability to, in essence, override or throw in some additional clauses to either protect the firm, protect your license, or to, in essence, win the deal, honestly, with the seller. So there are some things that are much more I would say seller favored than they are buyer favored. That's the reason why we have that acknowledgement at the very beginning. But term one is a personal sale. The buyer is a licensed real estate broker in the state of Washington, or the seller. So instead of typing that up, you could simply just drag and drop a checkbox into term one on this, and that will be sufficient. You don't have to type something up in the 22D other. Number two, buyer or seller is an authorized member of the LLC. We are seeing way too much creativity on that. Again, it should be disclosed. So number one and number two are just disclosure items that often you guys type into a contract. Now you won't need to do that. You can just use the optional addendum and check those two boxes. Let's go to the next slide. Earnest money changed to deposit. So in the revision that the MLS made and the legal team and the forms committee made to our forms that are being released, nowhere in there did they change the clause to earnest money changed to a deposit. We are seeing, again, very much too much creativity. This is an example of a contract that just was paid out today. Luckily, in this instance, there was no hassle with earnest money or changing it, the language or dispute, but it's not proper. So this is what we tend to see. Jerry Kay and I both see it a lot. Buyer agrees to make the earnest money of $30,000 non-refundable. That's not the proper way to write that, although our agent is practicing law by typing it into that section of the contract. Luckily, she got the deal. Luckily, there was no issues with the other side, but unfortunately, it's not proper. And so if you are going to want to make your earnest money non-refundable, in essence, write that section, rewrite the section of the contract. And oh, by the way, the earnest money is changing, but not in this way. They are providing a clear date on the contract of when the earnest money needs to be deposited, right on the Form 21, right on the Form 28. However, if you are wanting to, again, beat out other potential offers, you may want to consider using Section 3, Term 3, on the optional clauses and turning that earnest money into a non-refundable deposit that's applicable to the purchase price and given to the sellers. It basically makes the sellers feel very comfortable knowing that if you default, that they get their earnest money. It becomes a non-refundable deposit. So that language is provided to you guys in term 3. Many other companies have a similar type of earnest money non-refundable clause. Windermere, I know, has one. Keller Williams has one. So we have our own earnest money non-refundable that actually is very similar to some of those. So again, we vetted it with our attorney. You can use that if you'd like. Please do not use and type up your own earnest money non-refundable clause in the section 22D other. I'd rather have you use the optional clause or the optional addendum that we have. Let's go to the next slide. The next one is we have in term 4, some of you are trying to deal with, in King County specifically, we're having the biggest problem where the recording is not taking place, and we have like 3 days, 4 days. We had up to a week on one of the files where the recording just took longer than typical. If you check box number 4, the definition of closing in term F is actually specified. Our attorney has looked at this document and has vetted this clause. And so there's no more the need for a 22 FM, a force majeure. What I would recommend doing, especially if you're working with a buyer and a seller and you're concerned about that closing date and whether they have, what's closing, what's recording, go ahead and use this and check the box for number 4. And that's a properly vetted extension for recording delays that can be embedded into the contract that our attorney has approved as far as language goes. So again, no more using 22 FM. If you are a listing agent and you get a buyer's agent that uses 22 FM, suggest that we go ahead and write this extension or include this extension into the contract. So that's a properly worded recording delay contract. Many of the smaller brokerages do not have this. A lot of the larger companies have this extension for recording delays in their addenda or in a 22Y, for example. And we can provide that to you if you need it. Or if you have a contract currently right now and you're like, dang it, it's not looking so good, we're probably going to need an extension. If you'd like me to provide this language on the 22Y, we often are seeing this type of language going in there. So yeah, keep that in mind if you've got a deal that's kind of on the rocks right now. The number 5, term 5 on the actual BCR addenda is term number 13. Many of you newer brokers do not understand that how this impacts you. I think Nick, if I remember right, way back at 2 or 3 firms ago, he actually had an incident with his designated broker where they didn't even educate him properly on what is specific term number 13 and who pays for what. And so sewer capacity charge in King County is huge. It can be thousands of dollars. And if the listing agent hasn't done their job and looked to see how much sewer capacity is, you could basically be waiving or having to pay for that sewer capacity charge, which could be thousands of dollars if you do not specify what that term number 13 means. So number 5 says that specific term number 13, assessments including but not limited to sewer capacity charge, LID charges, and impact charges that are levied before closing but become due after closing, is the responsibility of the buyer. So again, this is use term number 5 if your buyer is willing to assume that and not have the seller pay for that. So again, this would be something where the listing agent is not sure how much the sewer capacity is or the LID, and you're like, I want to win, and my buyer's fine paying the $2,000 or whatever the remaining balance is. This would be an opportunity to just take that off the table and in essence win the deal so that the listing agent feels comfortable knowing that the buyer is willing to assume that charge. So again, use number 5 sparingly, but this is a tool that sometimes we've used in order to get the deal. Number 6, let's go to that one. So many of you have asked me, well, can I just write on the BCR or the optional clauses on 22D, can I just write buyer is buying the home as is? And I can tell you that if you spoke with any attorney in Washington that's practicing real estate law and practicing it well, are going to have major heartburn on this language. So what you want to be concerned about is, what does as is mean? You have to specify what this language means. As is, where is, without fault basis. And obviously from this section, term 6, if you are wanting your buyer to buy as is, the buyer acknowledges that there are contingencies, but they're going to go ahead and buy the home as it is without fault basis. They're going to represent and guarantee and hold us harmless and all of that legal language. This is the proper attorney approved language that you should be using if your buyer is wanting to buy it as is. So make sure you read this paragraph 6. And if you want to include that, you would just check the box, and the buyer in essence would not have an inspection. Typically, this is the way that you would specify as is language, number 6. So if you're wanting to I'm going to use my inspection, but I'm not going to, negotiate. I mean, certainly you can use section 6 for that because they're buying it as is, but you do have the section 35 if you are putting a term. In essence, you still get the right to terminate, but the as is language means that you're not negotiating off of repairs or expenses or things like that. You just simply would be able to terminate based on your inspection contingency. So make sure you understand how to use section 6. If you haven't done this before, your buyer's like, ooh, I just want to waive my inspection and waive this and waive that, and they're okay with that, you certainly can use section 6, which is definitely in the best interest of the seller. It means they're not relying on information you provided or the seller provided, and they're buying the home as an as-is property. Many bankruptcy sales, many short sales, many foreclosures, HUD homes, those types of entities that have attorneys or law firms that they are tied to, they have really kind of, in essence, this is their term or a version of similar type of language that they put in their contracts when they sell a bank-owned property or when they sell a short sale property. That's the kind of language that they use. It doesn't just simply say buyer is buying as is. That makes no sense to an attorney, and it's not proper. So make sure you're using the correct language here. Let's go to the next slide. Number 7, so hold harmless. This is, like I said earlier on in the call, what Jerry Kay, where we had an issue with John L. Scott, where we didn't get acceptance because we were basically placing this language on a Form 34. And John L. Scott would have been much more happy to go with our offer if we had used some sort of approved addendum like this one right here. Term number 7 would be the box that you would check. And this would be the section where you are not using a 22S, you're not using a 22W, you're not using a 22KS. The buyer is going to basically pump the septic or buy the home in as is or with a well or septic or sewer system that has issues, this is the kind of language that you're going to want to incorporate into your contract. So that would be checked. And the buyer has basically looked at it as is, and they are deciding to move forward with the purchase or the sale, knowing that issue with the sewer, knowing that issue with the septic. If you don't have this, we can certainly try after mutual acceptance to get the parties to agree on it, but it's much more difficult to get the seller to sign off on this after the fact than at the beginning. So you may want to utilize this as a way to hold the parties harmless from a septic or a sewer that's not good. Let's go to the next slide. Number 8, use when using an escalation. So if you are using an escalation and you don't want to have the buyer sue you later after the fact, maybe you didn't provide them a CMA and they said, well, my buyer's agent didn't advise me on how much I should go up in offering price. And then they get their hands on a good attorney and they can argue, you could be seen as not doing your job or not getting their authority to move forward with that escalated price. So in order to prevent that, many other brokerages have similar type language. We now have that in term number 8. If the offered purchase price exceeds the list price, the party acknowledges that they may be paying higher than market value and that the appraisal may not come in, and the buyer's decision to pay over market is done on the buyer's discretion. It's not, they strongly urge the buyer to seek legal advice in this matter. So again, it protects you. If you're running like really fast trying to get something established, you might want to just go ahead and throw this one into the mix and check the box just to protect yourself. And that way the buyer really can't come back and say that they didn't have any acknowledgement of you not providing a CMA or providing a market analysis or whatever that case may be. There is a push right now with the DOL to get buyer's agents. I don't know how this is going to go across, but they're talking about it. I don't think it has taken effect, but they're wanting to get copies of CMAs now that buyer's agents are using or that listing agents are using to provide in the file, which auditors are asking for it right now, but the designated brokers are pushing back like feverishly, trying not to have that happen. We realize that it's not realistic to think about you guys providing the firm a CMA. So you might want to start using term 8 if you're not doing a buyer CMA and kind of advising a buyer how much they should go up to. Certainly, if you are doing that in practice or sending them an email, you might want to just go ahead and CC the firm or send that into support so that we have a copy of that dialogue. That would be sufficient in the file, or just simply use number 8 and then you're covered on that part. Let's go to the next slide. Now, last one that we have to cover tonight, which I'm right at the 6 o'clock hour. Some of those of you that are newer, I talk very fast and you might have to replay some of the section, but number 9 is something that was talked about on our BCR Facebook closed group on, is it feasible to pay the buyer? Can the buyer pay some of the seller's closing costs? And the answer is yes, as long as it's approved by both the buyer and the seller. It is part of the contract. So this box, you would check term number 9, and the buyer shall pay up to $4,000, $3,000. As you guys know, sellers have to pay excise tax. They have to pay half of the escrow fee. They have expenses. They pay for home warranty sometimes. Whatever that cost may be that's on their side of this closing statement, it can be applied and the seller can credit if they are wanting to kind of, in essence, lure the buyer to go with their offer over another. In other states, this has been very successful. I think in Arizona, they're doing this very regularly. And certainly we want to be ahead of the curve and provide an opportunity for our sellers or our buyers to compete, and really put it out there that we're very serious about paying for the seller's closing costs. So certainly you have that option if you want by checking the box and filling in the blank. Do not check the box if you are not going to be paying closing costs. So just be careful on that you don't accidentally check the box when you're dragging and dropping. I don't want to have any kind of dispute there. But let's go ahead and try it and see if we can win some deals using term number 9. And then that's the entire agreement. I think somebody asked, can we take this apart? It's not meant to be a take it apart kind of thing. It's meant to be a buyer purchase and sale agreement, additional clauses that your buyer would then sign and initiate and put it with their contract. and use the check boxes as a way to show that we're serious, that we take our offer very seriously. And then the buyer and seller would have to sign it in order for it to be part of the contract. Could you, in essence, take it apart? Well, we have been in practice, and sometimes it served us well, other times it has not. The earnest money non-refundable, we've been using it as in the 22D other, in the Form 34, and for the most part, we're making it out okay. But this just actually gives us some more credibility out there when we're up against, say, Windermere, John L. Scott, Keller Williams, that have spent the time and money in legal time to actually put their additional clauses together. So you can certainly use it as a tool. I'm not going to require it as a requirement in order to close a file. It's certainly used as a tool to help you win if you are struggling. You're like, gosh, dang it, I want to just put something in front that's more in favor of the seller to show that we want to buy the home as is, or we want to, pay over the asking price for it, or we just want to make our earnest money non-refundable. All of these types of strategies have worked in the past if you couple it with some of the aspects of the contract. And it will all make sense when you kind of see the new contracts and see how you can layer some of these things. It's still, I think there is a need for additional clauses, even after the revisions that we saw just this last week. So that's what I've got tonight. I'll take questions if there are questions from the group. And Candace, certainly if there's something that you needed me to discuss, I'm open to you. I mean, I think you talked to more of our brokers. Did I cover pretty much some of the things that you guys are hearing? And Nick, if you want to unmute your line.
Yeah, I think this is great, and I think it will be a great help, just being able to add this on, definitely.
Okay, so you can't think of anything that we didn't cover? I think we covered most.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions that came through the chat, and Fatah was saying, well, what happened to the BCR Form 22D, our multiple offer disclosure form? And this is to, if I'm understanding this right, Rochelle, this is to replace that form.
Correct.
Yep, modernize it and update it.
Yeah, and the other one, unfortunately, Fatah, it doesn't collide well with the new form. So we did have to make major adjustments to the 22A. What's great is the MLS, the Forms Committee, actually took the 22A, like the appraisal less than the sales price, and having appraisal contingency or not having waiver of financing contingency. They've modernized all of that in the 22A. So we're very fortunate we don't have to create additional clauses to show that we're strong or that we're waiving the finance contingency. I think it's much, much better than it used to be. So look forward to seeing and learning about the 22A revisions. Great question. Shannon, anything else?
I think we have someone pose a question that has a DBA. Well, does this cover my DBA as well as Best Choice Realty? And the answer to that would be yes, right? Yes. I mean, if they've got an assumed name with Best Choice Realty, it would also cover them.
Correct. Yeah, they're still licensed under Best Choice Realty for interests of DOL compliance and Northwest MLS compliance. So yes, that's correct. Nick, anything else I missed?
No, I think you got it.
Okay. Are we happy about the seller closing costs? Are you give me a thumbs up on that one?
I think that's good. They're still, the people I'm talking down in Arizona, it's working for them.
Okay.
They even said what they're doing in addition to that is offering to pay the buyer's side of the seller's commission.
Really? Well, I mean, that could be a credit as well. I think I said commissions on there too. So
kind of the same thing, but just a little different twitch to it.
Cool. Very, very good. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and one more clarification question that came through as well is for that as is language. In practice, would I use that with an inspection contingency?
We will need to go over that and how the 35. I want to teach that when we teach the 35 section, because they changed the 35, you guys, too. There's a 35 and there's a 35W. So there's two different type of inspection contingencies. So more to come on that. But I do think that the as is language is what we want to use going forward if you are truly buying the home in an as is situation. So I'll have to research and come back to them. If you can give the name of that agent, that would be great, Shannon.
Yeah, a couple other questions too for those that are wondering about the new forms. They are posted. They've been on the legal bulletins the last week or so, but they are to go effective on March 3rd is when they'll start showing up on Transaction Desk. They are available if you go on the main page of the MLS site. You can take a look at them. They have the red line versions, and they also have the clean versions that are like more readable versions that you can take a look at if you wanted to get a sneak peek. And then another question that came through is, do you recommend taking the MLS forms class or waiting for the classes we'll have in-house?
I think there's so many changes. And Nick, I mean, you agree, right? I mean, there are so many changes that I don't think you can do enough training on the contract with the changes they're making. So I would definitely look at your schedule, figure out when you can do the forms class with Justin Hag. He's fantastic. He's a great teacher. And then look for the date where we actually synthesize. We're going to give you the cliff notes and kind of be more workshop based, which I think some people learn better in that environment, not lecture, right? But more workshop. So I think coupling the two, I think will be very good. Candace and I spent a long time going through the roster and trying to make sure that we've formed these groups so that you guys can learn from each other and it can be at your pace. And we blocked out enough time to really synthesize the data and teach it in a way that makes sense for all of you. So more to come. But yeah, I think you can't get enough of this stuff. And there's just so many changes that took place with the new provisions.
I mean, massive, for those that are wondering, massive changes to the inspections, to financing, and escalation forms, which are all big topics right now.
Yep. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm losing out, well, you know what? This is a fresh start. This is a way you can almost kind of reset, use this kind of as a reset for your business. And if you've been frustrated with your buyers right now, hopefully the addendum will help you and give you at least something right now you can start trying to use. Other than that, then it comes down to price and terms and how do you have those conversations. And with the new set of forms, there are going to be some strategies, and the ones that are going to win, I can see this happening already, are the ones that know their forms, that know their contracts. Those are the brokers that are going to really stand out when you're up against, say, 2 other agents or 10 other agents, or just, gosh, somebody said they had 29 offers on one property. It's insane out there. You got to know your forms so that you stand out in a good way, not a bad way. So get on there. I mean, the first week, there's only a few options. They max out at 500 people can attend the class. And so they're maxing them out. So this week they're already full. And then by March, they'll fill up all of that first week of March. So I can't emphasize that enough. Get yourself a class. Candace had to wait until March, I think, 1st to get her class. So get on there and get that going so that you have at least some background that we can then talk about application. We can talk about how do you use these forms now that you have them, right? Because they'll be live. How do you strategize and what do you do and which checkbox, and we tried this and this didn't work. Again, you're going to be well versed in the contracts if you attend both the workshop and the one that Justin Hag is doing on the forms. Okay. Anything else, Jan, that came in?
No, I think that kind of wraps us up.
Okay, and seriously, join us on Wednesday. Candace is going to be hosting with me, and a lot of questions that she's had from the field about her lender, like my client wants to do a bridge loan or they want to do some other creative kind of thing. Let's make sure that we have so a good vetted lender that can answer some of those questions. We're not lenders, and it's so much better coming from a lender perspective on strategies that have worked. And we're going to discuss all of those on Wednesday. So come with your questions for the lender portion, and then it will make a lot of sense when you see the revisions too, that there will be strategies not only from a lending perspective, but from a writing a contract perspective. It should all kind of come together for you. So some good news. I love all the changes. Nick, I think it's fantastic. A lot of the changes are much needed in our industry, and a lot of it's been cleaned up. So I'm actually for most of it. There's only a few that's just the old dog in me I'm having a hard time with. But once I hear it and I see it and I actually apply it, it's coming together, and it's really marinating well in the overall picture of things. So have a great week.